Boy, I'm hungry for a lot of things. Children, kids. I'm not really sure.
He was Hollywood's golden boy, charming, wild, and untouchable. But behind Burt Reynolds' million-dollar smile was a father-son story no one truly understood, until now. Why did the biggest box office star of the 70s leave his only son out of his will? Why did it take 36 years for that son to finally break his silence? And what truth has been hidden all these years behind the closed doors of the Reynolds legacy?
Burt Reynolds spent a decade taking on bit roles in Hollywood before breaking through with roles in some of the biggest films of the decade.
If you've ever wondered what really happened between Burt Reynolds and his quiet, private son, this is the story Hollywood never told. Using legal documents, personal statements, and first-hand interviews, we uncover what Quinton Reynolds just revealed about his famous father.
Reputation
I did?
over the years.
Oh.
Yes, you did. You write in the book that your biggest regret was not making it work.
Fame, family, betrayal, and love, it's all here. Behind the mustache, Burt's true nature. To millions, Burt Reynolds was the face of charm, swagger, and Hollywood confidence. With that iconic mustache, a booming laugh, and a magnetism that dominated movie screens, it was easy to believe he lived exactly as he appeared, fearless and always in control. But beyond the lights, behind closed doors, Reynolds was a far more complex man, one shaped by pain, discipline, and the emotional silence of his childhood. Reynolds was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1936 to a military man turned police chief, Burton Milo Reynolds Sr., and his wife, Fern. From the very beginning, Burt's life was influenced by his father's rigid presence. Burt would later admit that growing up with a man like his dad left lasting scars. On shows like The Jonathan Ross Show, he opened up about how his father never once told him, "I love you." That absence of emotional warmth weighed heavily on the young boy who would grow up to be one of Hollywood's most charismatic stars. Reynolds shared that even as a grown man, the only affection he ever got was when his father told him, "I'm proud of you." And in Burt's eyes, that meant everything. It was the closest thing to love he ever received. This emotional vacuum had a direct impact on Burt's relationships and the type of man he became. Known for his impulsive decisions and fiery relationships with high-profile women like Sally Field and Lonnie Anderson, Burt often sought connection, but seemed afraid of letting anyone too close. His sense of humor became a shield, and his physical stunts a way to prove his worth without ever needing to ask for approval. For someone so adored, he often carried the quiet ache of never feeling truly enough. That hunger for validation wasn't just personal, it drove his career choices too. Burt would later admit in his memoir, "But Enough About Me," that he turned down serious roles that could have earned him critical respect, simply because he was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being seen as weak. He wasn't chasing awards, he was chasing something he never got at home: acceptance. "I didn't open myself to risky parts," he wrote. "I just wanted to have a good time." But the truth behind that light-hearted line was darker. What he really wanted was to feel safe. But the more Burt tried to protect his own son from pain, the more he passed down the one thing he was running from: the quiet son in the shadows. In a world dominated by flashing cameras, tabloid headlines, and red carpets, Quinton Reynolds chose to disappear into the background. The adopted son of Burt Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson, Quinton grew up surrounded by fame, but seemingly untouched by its temptations. He never courted attention, never sought interviews, and rarely showed up in public events. To outsiders, he was a mystery. But for those who looked closer, Quinton's silence wasn't distance, it was devotion. Born in 1988 and adopted shortly after birth, Quinton came into Burt Reynolds' life at a time when the star was juggling massive movie success with personal chaos. His marriage to Anderson was already shaky, and within a few years, it would publicly unravel. The custody battle that followed was ugly and played out across media outlets. But through it all, Quinton remained out of the spotlight, shielded, perhaps intentionally, by a father who knew too well the price of fame. Despite Burt and Lonnie's contentious divorce, both parents shared a clear commitment to protecting their son. And that meant giving him something neither of them truly had growing up: privacy. Quinton was raised with intention. While most Hollywood children are introduced to the business before they can walk, he took a different route. As he grew older, he pursued a career in film, but not in front of the camera. Instead, he worked quietly in the industry as a camera assistant and digital imaging technician, helping others shine while staying behind the scenes. But that quiet life was shattered, briefly, when Burt Reynolds passed away in 2018. Headlines exploded with a shocking revelation. Burt had left Quinton out of his will. For a moment, the public narrative shifted. People wondered if the father and son had fallen out. Some speculated that the same emotional distance Burt had experienced with his own father had somehow repeated itself. Was history repeating? The truth, however, was far more thoughtful. Burt hadn't disinherited Quinton at all. In fact, he had made provisions for his son in a private trust years before his death. It was a strategic choice. A trust, unlike a will, keeps financial matters out of public probate court. That means no tabloids, no legal fights, no unnecessary drama. Just peace and protection. In the will, Burt had even written, "I intentionally omit him from this, my last will and testament, as I have provided for him during my lifetime in my declaration of trust." It wasn't rejection. It was care in disguise. Lonnie Anderson immediately stepped forward to clear up the confusion. In a public statement, she said, "Quinton and I are extremely touched by the tremendous outpouring of love and support." She referred to Burt as a wonderful director and actor, but more importantly, as a father. The words were brief but warm, deflecting speculation and reinforcing the fact that, despite what people thought they saw on paper, love had always been there. Quinton, true to his nature, didn't comment. He never made a public statement, never sat down for an interview, never capitalized on the headlines. He stayed silent, and that silence said everything. His decision to stay behind the lens may have puzzled the public. But to those who knew Burt best, it made perfect sense. Quinton was the son Burt had always wanted to be, unbothered by approval and grounded in his own identity. But it wasn't the inheritance, or lack of it, that finally pushed Quinton to speak. It was something far more personal. The will that shocked Hollywood. When Burt Reynolds passed away in 2018, fans, friends, and former colleagues mourned the loss of a screen legend. But not long after the heartfelt tributes faded, a new story took center stage, and it stunned even those who thought they knew the man well. It wasn't a scandal about money squandered or affairs resurfaced. It was something far more personal. Burt Reynolds had intentionally left his only son, Quinton, out of his will. The will, signed in October 2011, was direct and unflinching. It stated, "I intentionally omit him from this, my last will and testament, as I have provided for him during my lifetime in my declaration of trust." That one line ignited a firestorm. The phrasing, legal, cold, and seemingly dismissive, led to an avalanche of assumptions. People immediately wondered, Was there bad blood between father and son? Had their relationship soured in the final years of Burt's life? Hollywood insiders were just as shocked as the public. How could a man who once said he showered his son with hugs, kisses, and repeated "I love yous" now seem so emotionally detached in writing? Gossip columns ran wild. Some claimed Quinton had distanced himself. Others speculated that Burt had grown bitter or regretful in his old age. But buried under the headlines was a crucial legal truth, one that very few bothered to understand. Burt Reynolds didn't cut Quinton out of his legacy. He protected him from it. By using a living trust instead of a will, Burt ensured that Quinton's inheritance would remain private. Unlike wills, which are processed through probate courts and become public records, trusts are kept out of court and out of the spotlight. This legal move wasn't about exclusion, it was about shielding his son from the chaos he himself had lived through. As one estate lawyer put it, leaving a trust in place is what you do when you want to give your family privacy, security, and control. But still, the damage was done. For days, Burt disowned son was the narrative splashed across media outlets. What the headlines failed to mention was that this strategy is common among celebrities and high-net-worth individuals. In fact, Burt had created the trust long before he passed away, and he had placed nearly all of his assets into it. Even more telling was who Burt chose to manage the trust: his niece, Nancy Lee Brown Hess. That detail raised more questions. Why not make Quinton both the beneficiary and executor? Again, the answer was thoughtful. Burt wanted to avoid any conflict of interest or public disputes. Having Nancy oversee the estate kept Quinton's name off court records and limited any possible legal challenges from outsiders. Burt had lived through lawsuits, tabloid smears, and personal betrayal. He wasn't going to let that touch his son. In a rare public comment, Nancy Hess shared, "My uncle was not just a movie icon, he was a generous, passionate, and sensitive man." Those close to the family confirmed that Burt and Quinton's bond never fractured. It simply stayed behind closed doors, where it was strongest. The public may have wanted a juicy feud, but the truth was quieter, more deliberate. Burt Reynolds had spent a lifetime making bold choices, on screen and off. This final act may have seemed abrupt, but in reality, it was carefully planned. He knew the media would jump on the omission, and yet he did it anyway. Why? Because Quinton's protection meant more to him than public perception. Still, the question lingered. If he planned it so carefully, why not explain it more clearly? Why not leave a letter, a note, a video, something for the world to understand? That silence left room for mystery. And in that mystery, a deeper legacy was about to surface, one that would reframe everything we thought we knew about Burt Reynolds. And while tabloids framed it as betrayal, Quinton's recent words revealed a plan built not from anger, but from foresight and love. The confession: why Burt did it. In the wake of the will's revelation, confusion swirled like a storm. Speculation ran rampant. Some believed Burt Reynolds acted out of bitterness. Others assumed there had been a private falling out between father and son. But the real answer, as it turns out, came from Burt himself. Quietly, without press conferences or dramatic declarations, he had already explained it. The truth wasn't hidden in legal documents. It was scattered across interviews, memoirs, and subtle moments. And when pieced together, they revealed something deeper than scandal. A confession rooted in regret, foresight, and love. Burt Reynolds was never shy about his failings. In his 2015 memoir, But Enough About Me, he admitted that he hadn't always made the right choices, financially, emotionally, or professionally. "I've lost more money than is possible because I just haven't watched it," he wrote. But among the mistakes he took ownership of, none weighed more heavily than the way he was raised, and how he fought to do better with his own son. One of the most telling revelations came during an appearance on the Jonathan Ross show, when Burt, visibly emotional, opened up about his relationship with his father. He never said, "I love you," Burt said. Not once, but one day he said, "I'm proud of you." That was the best it got. That moment stayed with him forever. For Burt, it became a mission, to be the father he never had. So when Quinton came into his life, adopted with then-wife Lonnie Anderson in 1988, Burt was determined not to repeat the cycle. He smothered his son with affection. "My son, who I hug and kiss and grab and love and say, 'I love you, I love you, I love you.' When he sees me coming, he covers his face," Burt once said, laughing softly. "But I can't help it. I don't want him to have what I had." This deeply personal reflection hints at the heart of Burt's decision to leave Quinton out of the will, not as punishment, not as rejection, but as protection. Estate planners agree that Burt's move wasn't just smart, it was loving. A trust gives you control. It's more secure, more private, and tailored to the needs of the person you care about, said one legal expert reviewing the case. By placing his assets in a trust and excluding Quinton from the public will, Burt ensured that Quinton would avoid drawn-out court battles and unwanted media attention. In other words, he gave his son peace. But Burt's confession goes beyond legal paperwork. In multiple interviews, he hinted at the emotional complexity behind his choices. "I don't want to be remembered just for the movies," he once said. "I want people to know I tried to be a good father. I tried hard." That raw admission paints a clearer picture of his motivations. Despite all his bravado and charisma, Burt Reynolds remained haunted by the void left by his own upbringing. His final years were less about protecting a reputation and more about redeeming a legacy. And that legacy wasn't measured in fame or fortune. It was measured in intention. The trust wasn't just a financial tool, it was a symbol. A way for Burt to tell his son in actions instead of words that he had learned from the past, that he had grown, that, in his own way, he was saying, "I love you," just like his father once had, with that single phrase, "I'm proud of you." Still, for many, the mystery of Burt's estate plan remained unresolved. If his intentions were so pure, why not speak louder? Why not make it crystal clear to the world? That answer, too, was coming, but not from Burt. The person who held that final piece of the puzzle was the one who had stayed silent the longest, until now. But it was Quinton's recent public comments that finally gave the world closure and shattered the rumors for good. The truth from a son. For years, Quinton Reynolds remained a quiet figure in the shadows of his father's massive legacy. While Burt Reynolds was one of Hollywood's most recognizable icons, with his signature mustache, wild laugh, and a career that spanned generations, Quinton stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't chase fame. He didn't ride the Reynolds name into red carpet premieres. In fact, many people forgot he even existed until he was suddenly thrust into public conversation after the will controversy. When news broke in 2018 that Burt had excluded his only son from his will, the headlines lit up with speculation. Estranged, some papers said. Cut off, others assumed. People wondered, had something gone terribly wrong behind closed doors? For a while, Quinton stayed silent. And then, slowly, he spoke. Not with fanfare or drama, but with calm clarity. In a rare interview, Quinton addressed the swirling rumors. "My dad wasn't perfect, but he never stopped loving me," he said. He showed it in his own way, sometimes too quiet for people to notice. That statement alone cut through the noise. The will hadn't been a rejection, it had been a plan. And Quinton, more than anyone, understood why his father did what he did. Those close to Quinton describe him as soft-spoken, thoughtful, and grounded. Traits that might surprise anyone expecting a flashy celebrity offspring. He works behind the scenes in the film industry, focusing on camera work and post-production. "I've never wanted the spotlight," he once admitted. "I saw what it did to people, even someone as strong as my dad." That choice, to forge his own path away from fame, may have been what kept their bond strong in the later years. And while Burt never said much publicly about his son, the few moments he did were telling. "He's my greatest achievement," Burt once said. "Not the movies, not the awards." Those weren't throwaway words. They came from a man who had been broken, rebuilt, and humbled by life's highs and lows. After Burt's passing, Quinton didn't rush to correct the media's narrative. But those closest to the family, including Burt's niece and estate executor Nancy Lee Hess, came forward. "Burt adored Quinton," she said. "There was never any falling out. What he did with the will was strategic. He wanted things to be private, clean, and free of the kind of legal mess that so often follows celebrity deaths. In fact, the trust Burt had set up for Quinton years before his death ensured that his son would be taken care of, financially and emotionally. It allowed Quinton to avoid probate, avoid publicity, and maintain the kind of quiet life he had always chosen. Legal experts confirmed that this was a common move among celebrities, bypassing the will in favor of a trust, which remains private and secure. But perhaps the most powerful part of Quinton's truth came not from legal explanations, but from emotional closure. "He protected me," Quinton said in a soft moment, "in life and in death." That's what a father's supposed to do. It was a simple statement, but it said everything. For all the headlines, all the public misunderstandings, the relationship between Burt and Quinton was never broken. As Quinton continues to work behind the scenes and build his own legacy, he carries with him the lessons and love of a complicated man. He never needed the world's approval. He just needed to know he was loved. And in his father's final, carefully planned gesture, he found his answer. And while fans mourned the loss of a legend, Quinton was quietly honoring a promise that no camera ever caught. Fame's price and what's unspoken. Burt Reynolds lived in the fast lane, both literally and metaphorically. His movies were full of speed, danger, and bravado. Off-screen, his life mirrored the same chaos. But behind the car chases and charming grins, there were bruises, both physical and emotional, that no camera ever caught. Fame brought Burt everything he dreamed of: wealth, power, recognition, but it also demanded a heavy price. And some of that cost, as it turns out, was paid in silence. Over the course of his career, Burt was injured more times than most actors would ever admit. From shattered bones to chronic pain, he lived with the toll of his own stunts long after the applause faded. One of his worst injuries came in 1984 on the set of City Heat. He was hit in the face with a metal chair and suffered from temporomandibular joint dysfunction, TMJ. The condition left him unable to chew properly, and he lost more than 30 pounds. But Reynolds refused to let the public see him weakened. He joked about it. He smiled through the pain. He acted like the same old bandit. That performance, the one off-screen, may have been his most convincing of all, because what he never said aloud was just how deeply he was struggling. In private, friends say, Burt wrestled with anxiety, depression, and insecurity. His on-screen bravado masked a man constantly questioning whether he was good enough, not just as an actor, but as a son, a partner, and eventually, a father. He was tough, sure, a close friend once said, but only because he thought he had to be. That toughness came at a cost. Relationships crumbled, opportunities were missed, and while Reynolds loved deeply, he often found it difficult to express that love in the ways others needed. His father never told him, "I love you," and in turn, Burt struggled with expressing vulnerability, even to the people he cared about most. That included his son, Quinton. Many close to Burt believed that the decision to use a trust instead of naming Quinton in his will was one part protection and one part personal regret. He didn't want Quinton to go through the media circus he himself had lived through for decades. But he also, perhaps, didn't know how to talk about it. And so he wrote it into legal language and hoped it would be understood later. Even his career choices carried a silent weight. He turned down major roles: Star Wars, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Die Hard, because he didn't see himself as serious enough. "I missed chances," he later wrote in his memoir. "I wasn't brave enough to take certain roles. I didn't think I had what it took." For a man who played heroes on screen, it's a tragic truth. And then there was Sally Field, the love of his life. He called her that until the very end. But when he spoke about their breakup, he admitted it was his fault. "I was stupid. I let her go." He never got her back. Some wounds, no matter how much time passes, stay open. So much was left unsaid, not just in relationships, but in legacy. Reynolds wanted to be remembered for more than just the laugh, the Trans Am, or the cosmopolitan centerfold. He wanted to be known as someone who tried, who failed, who hurt, but who kept showing up. That nuance, that unspoken humanity, was perhaps his greatest contradiction. A man who said little about the things that mattered most, but who felt them deeply. What we do know is this: his silence wasn't emptiness. It was protection. It was love. It was regret. And sometimes, the loudest truths are the ones left unspoken. But in protecting his son from the world, did Burt accidentally leave him feeling unseen? Legacy, love, and a final goodbye. When Burt Reynolds passed away in 2018, headlines rushed to capture the legacy of a Hollywood legend, the box office king, the mustachioed heartthrob, the stunt-loving rogue with unmatched charm. But beneath the film reels and red carpets was a quieter, more intimate legacy unfolding. One not scripted for the screen, but written in the spaces between fame, fatherhood, and final goodbyes. Burt's death at the age of 82 was unexpected, even after years of health complications. He'd endured back surgeries, heart procedures, and the long-term effects of decades of performing his own stunts. But through all the wear and tear, few anticipated that the man who once boasted Hollywood's biggest smile would suddenly be gone. What remained wasn't just a filmography. It was the question of what he truly left behind. That question intensified when the contents of his will became public. The document explicitly stated that Burt Reynolds was intentionally leaving his only son, Quinton, out of it. To many, it sounded like abandonment. To others, a final fracture in a strained relationship. But the truth was something far more deliberate and far more loving. Burt hadn't excluded Quinton out of anger or neglect. Instead, he'd placed his assets in a trust, ensuring his son would receive support, privacy, and protection without the invasive glare of probate court. It was a move often misunderstood by the public, but common among celebrities who want to shield their families from legal battles and public scrutiny. In doing so, Burt may have finally expressed the kind of care he struggled to show in words during his lifetime. Still, the emotional complexity lingered. Choosing not to name his son directly in a will meant risking misinterpretation. But those who knew Burt understood. He'd never been one for traditional expressions of affection. His love was quieter, more guarded, and often tangled in the traumas of his own upbringing. Quinton, in his own rare public statements, never voiced bitterness. Instead, he stayed private. Lonnie Anderson, Quinton's mother and Burt's ex-wife, helped bridge the silence after his death. "Burt was a wonderful director and actor," she said. "He was a big part of my life for 12 years, and Quinton's father for 30. Her words painted a picture of respect and shared history, not conflict. The same could be said of Nancy Lee Brown Hess, Burt's niece and chosen executor of his estate. She remembered him not just as an icon, but as a generous, passionate, and sensitive man. Years later, that memory became even more vivid when Nancy produced the documentary I Am Burt Reynolds. It was a tribute not just to a celebrity, but to a human being, one who made mistakes, loved deeply, failed publicly, and still managed to keep getting back up. The film gave fans one last glimpse behind the camera, where the real Burt often hid. In 2021, Reynolds was officially laid to rest at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. A bronze bust of him was placed there later that year, a fitting monument to a man who had given so much to film. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came not from marble or metal, but from those who loved him most. Sally Field, his longtime partner and enduring love, offered one of the most poignant sentiments. "He will be in my history and my heart for as long as I live." For Quinton, the legacy was far more personal. He inherited more than financial security. He inherited the burden and beauty of being the son of Burt Reynolds. A son who chose a life out of the spotlight. A son who never publicly rebuked or glorified his father, but instead lived in quiet acknowledgement of who he was. That silence, much like Burt's own, spoke volumes. In the end, Burt Reynolds didn't just leave behind films. He left behind a map of contradictions, courage, laughter, loss, and legacy. A flawed but fiercely loving father. A superstar who doubted himself. A man who protected his son not by words but by actions that only made sense after he was gone. In the end, Quinton's truth wasn't a scandal. It was a tribute to a father who never stopped trying. Fathers and sons rarely get perfect endings, but sometimes they get a second chance through honesty, memory, and time. If this story moved you, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories from behind Hollywood's golden curtains. Let the truth keep shining, and don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen to watch the next story we know you'll love.